Story 1. I work on survey ships for conservation. I was part of the crew when we hit an unmapped rock. $500,000 worth of damage to the vessel's hull and years of paperwork. Story 2. Sledding in the Tyrolean Alps. Missed just one turn. Helicopter, hospital, x-rays, surgery, recovery, 1 month, ambulance, transatlantic flight, 5 months physical therapy. Story 3. I accidentally exercised 25 options out of the money in 1998 and lost $60,000 in 60 seconds. There was a stock split, and in those days, the option symbol was changed to indicate that the option no longer represented 100 shares. I did not recognize this. Whoops. Story 4. Worked on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier moving F-18s and other aircraft around. A couple of very expensive 60-second moments happened while I watched a director collide two jets. What looked like minor damage to airfoils, wings, and the airframe ended up costing $5 million to repair. Fortunately, both times I was the lowest person in the chain of command and never received blame. Story 5. I made a massive mistake at work and had to discard $15 million worth of vaccines because I added an expired chemical. I never made that mistake again. Story 6. I was misdiagnosed as having a heart attack at work and rushed to the hospital. The emergency room doctor asked, "Why are you here?" Story 7. I stepped on a water line in the ceiling of a marijuana grow room, which leaked onto $100,000 worth of plants. They all had to be sold as lower quality weed used in concentrates, so I only received about 5% of their original value. Story 8. I am a doctor in the intensive care unit. Care is expensive when people are very sick. I can recall some moments where things went sideways and patients became very complicated, such as a combination liver, kidney, and pancreas transplant that suddenly stopped working before my eyes. However, there was never anything that was my fault, just sick people being sick, and sometimes the body behaves unpredictably. One incident that I can remember was my responsibility. I had a patient bleeding heavily due to blood thinner medication after surgery. In this case, you administer a medicine called Kcentra, which reverses the effects of the blood thinner. It is extremely expensive, not because of price gouging, but because it is produced from human plasma through a very costly process. One adult dose costs about $60,000. The patient was bleeding out, and usually a pharmacist mixes our medications for us. The pharmacist was unavailable and would not return to mix the medication for over 20 minutes. I decided to mix it myself. I had not mixed my own medications for years, and the mixing adapter kit had changed since I last did it. I mixed it incorrectly, wasting $60,000 worth of medicine in 30 seconds. I received angry emails from administration about it for weeks. The patient recovered fully. For those wondering, the hospital absorbs the cost for incidents like this. The bill is not passed to the patient or their insurance. Story 9. Not exactly my personal loss, but the company I work with required my signature to release a batch of life-saving medication. I found a couple of batches to be subpar, not up to the high standards I expect, so I refused to sign off. That decision cost the company hundreds of millions. I do not regret it for a second. I will not put my name on something I cannot stand behind. Story 10. I was stationed on a nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine in the Atlantic. We launched a nuclear weapons launch platform as a test, loaded with dummy bombs. It was incredible. That cost $80 million, I believe. Then we waited an hour or two and did it again. Truly impressive. Now that I think about it, maybe it was $80 million for both tests, so $40 million each. I am not a missile technician, so I am not sure. Regardless, the actual launch lasts about 20 seconds and is very expensive. Story 11. Totaled my 36-hour-old Porsche 911 Turbo. It was inexpensive for me, but rather expensive for the insurance company. Story 12. Turning on mobile data in Switzerland costs over €100 each time you activate it by mistake, because Switzerland is not part of the European Union. Story 13. My very first command in the military, we were working on a new system called satellite communications. It used UHF radios and an encryption device, the KY-58, which is important, tied together for one antenna. When you load a KY-58, it makes a tone in the radio to let you know you have loaded it. This process is not in the manuals because it is so new, but you are supposed to pull the breaker for the satellite communications diplexer, which combines the two radios for the one antenna. Little Cavett wanted to show everyone he knew what to do to load a radio. I did not pull the breaker because that is not how you do the regular radio loading and burned up that diplexer. They did not notice, so we tried another diplexer before our civilian representative noticed. He looked over to the circuit breaker panel and did not see any white. The panel is black. A popped breaker has a white ring. He yelled loudly and punched the wall. Little Cavett did not work with the civilian contractors anymore. At the time, the diplexers were very rare. Each one was hand-installed on each aircraft and estimated to cost $1 million each. Story 14. I thought I was stepping on salted ice. Instead, I stepped on black ice and badly broke my ankle. I had to have 2 bolts and steel ligaments inserted and spend 3 months off work. Story 15. April 4th, 1995. My blood sugar was 630. Type 1 diabetes is expensive in ways you cannot imagine. Story 16. The dentist pulled 7 molars and teeth in about 2 minutes. The cost was $275 each. It was as quick and easy as peeling a corn cob. I have no insurance. Story 17. My marriage ceremony. We are now separated, but I am obligated to pay $1,500 per month, and I have already paid for 48 months. Story 18. The rush I felt the first time I injected heroin. That was 21 years ago. I have been clean for 15 years. Life still sucks. Story 19. The actual act of severely breaking my neck only took a few seconds. The journey to surgery took a couple of months, but ultimately, it came out to a little over $500,000 between the computed tomography scans, bone scans, eventual surgery, and hospital stay. Story 20. Back in 2021, I read about a meme stock I saw on Wall Street Bets called Sundial Growers while getting ready for work. I decided to buy some shares and then set a stop-loss limit. I suddenly needed to use the bathroom, so I went and did so. When I finished and checked my phone, the stock had dropped and hit my stop-loss. That was probably the fastest realized loss I have ever had. Story 21. Dropping my saxophone, almost 3,000 euros to fix. For a then 19-year-old, that was a lot. Luckily, it was insured, but I did not know that at the moment I dropped it. Story 22. I listened to my wife when I was going to buy $10,000 of Bitcoin at $7 a piece many years ago. I would be retired now. She did not want me to buy it. Story 23. At age 22, I jumped on my then significant other's couch and fractured a finger critical to my music performance degree. I finished the degree, but it became a $55,000 waste as I could not play my instrument enough to be a professional. Story 24. I'm in my early 20s and just received my first real paycheck. Feeling confident, I decided to treat myself by booking an indoor skydiving experience. It is not actual skydiving but a giant wind tunnel. I spent 1 minute floating awkwardly in a puffy suit while an instructor prevented me from hitting the wall. The experience cost me $120 for 60 seconds. To top it off, I looked like a flailing potato. Story 25. Not exactly my life, but I witnessed it. When a coworker wheeled an unsafe wheelchair into Zone 4, it was pulled into the core. At least no one was killed. Story 26. I left work sick on my birthday 1 year in my mid-20s. I stopped by a local grocery store for toilet paper. Then, I saw my dream car at the time in my favorite color at a dealership across the street. I went home with a new car and no toilet paper. Story 27. The accumulated time spent with my wife resulted in 2 of the most amazing and precious daughters you can imagine. Story 28. In February 2010, my wife and I decided to try to have a child. She was not interested in romance or dragging things out. All I was good to her for was my half of the baby kit. So, speed run time. The very first time we did it for real instead of practice, we scored a hole-in-one. I was looking forward to being used like a piece of meat for a few months, but after only 4 days, she was pregnant. So it was the first try that did it. Damn. In November 2010, our son was born, And that little bugger has cost more than anything in my life. Kids are expensive. Story 29. When I texted, "I can't do this anymore," to my ex-wife, who I refer to as the Ice Queen, I have been struggling financially since. Story 30. Told my manager to leave in front of all the staff and quit my job. Those 2 months after went from having a good chunk saved to having barely anything, as I also decided that was the time to start learning to drive and get a half-sleeve tattoo, along with other things that were needed and not needed. I count that 60 seconds as the expensive part because I knew what it would cost me, just not how much of a cost it was. Story 31. The fall I had getting out of a pool place I rented for my birthday resulted in a 10-part fracture of my humerus head. I spent a lot on medication, rehabilitation, and paying someone to cover me at my job. However, at least the surgery and hospital services were completely free here in Brazil. Story 32. The Tyler just finished our newly renovated bathroom. He needed to angle grind a few nails out of a vanity that was being built. It turns out sparks on anything porcelain are not good. A wall of new tiles later, and a lesson was learned. Story 33. There was a road accident involving my car on a highway. A court case related to it lasted for 15 years. Oh, it took less than 60 seconds. Story 34. Statistically, for Americans, it will be your insurance company searching for the last important code for your extended decline in the intensive care unit. Be sure you are at least sedated with propofol to dissociate from the aggressive financial pursuit if you can. Story 35. Accidentally put diesel in a petrol car in Ireland on my honeymoon. It was not overly expensive, costing $750, but it did take up a good portion of our third day there and caused us to skip the Dingle Peninsula. Story 36. Driving under the influence over a decade ago. I had a lawyer who mitigated what he could, but I blew a 0.15. The judge did not take long to reach the verdict. The court part was quick, but never again. Story 37. Cancer. Random mutation. Leukemia. 3 months in the hospital plus 2 years of treatment, and now 3 years of follow-up. Story 38. I was thinking of trading half my Bitcoin, almost a whole coin, so I transferred it to a different wallet, but it was late at night and I do not remember where I put it. It was only about $7,000 at the time, but it is only going to get worse. Story 39. Recently, my workshop with all my woodworking and metalworking tools was struck by lightning and burned to the ground. It took less than 60 seconds to go up in flames with all the accelerants inside. Story 40. Polymerase chain reaction test to travel during the height of coronavirus disease. Had to spend 3 days in a hotel while awaiting results of the $600 test. 60 seconds of getting my nostril swabbed cost me nearly $3,500. All just to leave America because my home country had been blacklisted and I could not get my visa extended despite being in the United States for the last 3 years. Story 41. Every month I receive a 1 milliliter injection that costs approximately $76,000, and I will be on it for life. Insurance has covered it so far, but it is still an expensive 30 seconds. Story 42. When you're 59 guests and you are still hungry at Big Bill's Palladium-covered A5 Wagyu steakhouse after you insisted on going there and offered a hearty my treat. Story 43. When my son was conceived, it was the most expensive but worth every penny and all the time and effort I put in to make it happen. Story 44. My first traffic fine was for parking for 1 minute with the signal lights on. At that moment, they fined me just for crossing to the post office to send a package. Story 45. Ozzy Osbourne sang me happy birthday during their The End tour. It was not cheap meeting them all and sadly no Bill Ward. Story 46. Me proposing to my now wife. Alternatively, the moment I decided to ship my new personal computer from abroad. Big mistake. Story 47. Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, to love and cherish, till death do you part? I do. Not quite a minute, but yes. Story 48. Saying I do. I love my wife and family deeply. I would do anything for them and provide everything they need. Story 49. Saying yes to a recommended magnetic resonance imaging scan for something that revealed there was nothing there. $5,000 with insurance, the cost still outweighs the peace of mind. Story 50. I had a high-risk brain operation where they had to go into the center of my head, specifically along the basal ganglia and thalamus on the left side, and create an embolism. They reached the fourth one while I was awake, and then everything went black. I was in a coma for 9 days. When I awoke, I had to relearn how to walk and talk, experiencing aphasia and ataxia. I think my first 2 weeks of treatment cost $2.2 million. I had a hemorrhagic stroke. I was 23 when this happened. I am now 30. Story 51. Dropping off my semen at the in vitro fertilization clinic. The costs of 2 implantations and then having 2 children after that one single deposit are easily over $300,000. Story 52. Being told I had leukemia and would have to be in a hospital for a month was unsurprisingly expensive, as were all subsequent hospital visits. Thank God for insurance, though. I hit my out-of-pocket maximum and deductible immediately. The first month I was in the hospital cost about $1 million, but I only had to pay my deductible and out-of-pocket maximum, so around $10,000. Story 53. Talking to my auto insurance company about my claim. It's Progressive, by the way. What a terrible company. I'm at fault for not researching their company more deeply and how they operate in a gray area of legality. Story 54. My spleen decided to burst inside me for no apparent reason when I was 19 and did not have health insurance. I had $180,000 in medical bills in 2006. I can only imagine how much it would cost now. Story 55. I was about to leave for work when I remembered I left a pack of 5 gum on the counter. I had already started the car, so I decided to just leave it on. I opened my door, got out of the car, and started to shut the door behind me. But something bumped into me and knocked me down. It was my car. I had put the car in reverse, remembered the gum, thought about going back inside, and decided to go back inside. The biggest issue was that our garage was a split 2-car garage. There were 2 garage doors and a brick column in the middle. By the time it knocked me down, there was no way to stop it without risking my life. I had to watch in horror as the door hit the column, then kept going and bent the door all the way back into the front quarter panel. Our driveway was on a steep incline, so I had to sprint to catch up with the car to stop it from backing into our neighbor's car parked across the street. Fortunately, I managed to stop the car. Then I just sat inside the car in the driveway in shock for about 20 minutes. This was also my second day at a new job. The new door and fixing the paint damage cost just about $1,500. Story 56. A professional Rainbow Six Siege player made a tweet that cost the team their multimillion-dollar sponsorship deal with Honda. So I am somewhere below that. Story 57. Managed to lose about $150 in a single transaction due to mistiming my foreign currency order at the bank. Not the biggest sum spent in a minute, but the most instantaneous loss I have had was when I ordered foreign currency at my bank. I used the application to order around 1,000 Canadian dollars for a trip. Due to last-minute plan changes, I did not manage to get to the bank in time to pick up the money before leaving for Canada. I got back from my trip, then went to the bank to collect the money and told them I did not need it any longer. They said I could redeposit it, but at a lower than average exchange rate. It turned out that exchange rate was a whole 20% less than the national average, so I managed to turn 1,000 Canadian dollars into 800 Canadian dollars in that single transaction. So, in that single moment of receiving the envelope of cash and then handing it back to them, it cost me around $150. I could have gone somewhere else for a better exchange rate. However, I was easily parted from my money. Story 58. I slipped on a muddy slope in my backyard that I had slipped on many times before. It is steep because we are in the mountains. Instead of landing on my butt and bruising my ego like I always had, I ended up with 2 broken bones, a bad dislocation, and significant ligament damage. Story 59. Would you like to take out critical illness insurance alongside the life insurance? How much more would that cost? £70 per month extra. No thanks. 7 months later, after taking out a £300,000 mortgage, I was diagnosed with cancer. That mortgage could have been paid off in full for the sake of £490 worth of insurance payments. God damn it. Story 60. When my ex sat me down and told me that she had changed her mind about not having children and was walking out on the $680,000 mortgage we had signed together. I have still been paying it by myself to this day. Story 61. The engine failed while I was flying a Cirrus SR-20 last Sunday. I had to make an emergency landing next to a canal. The aircraft is worth about $600,000. Story 62. Not me, because I am not a fool, but I watched a work colleague get sweet-talked and distracted by a stripper only to have her friend take over $1,000 from him while he was distracted. I raised the issue with the security guard, and the colleague was thrown out. Story 63. Hit a deer and also ditched another car to avoid a fox. The first one cost me $5,500 for the down payment on a new car and the insurance deductible. The second one was just $500 for the deductible. Not terrible, but not great either. All in all, the insurance made the experience great in both instances and probably as painless as possible. Story 64. I made a substantial amount of money trading with no inside information over the course of a year. I was still down overall in the market, but I watched as Silicon Valley Bank shares tanked from $675 to under $1. On the day of their real demise, trading was halted on their stock around 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. At 3:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I saw a flurry of transactions come across the board. I thought that was good news for the viability of the company or a short-term greedy gain. Trading started again. Less than 30 seconds after I placed my purchase order, trading was permanently halted on the symbol and company. It had technically already happened, but I lost about 99% of my trading account. My brokerage could not provide any information on the real shares I purchased, but they held me fully responsible for my reasons. I am still upset, but this is my answer to the question. Story 65. Car accident. I was at a stop sign preparing to turn left when a reckless driver was going 45 miles per hour in a 35 miles per hour zone in a Suburban and ripped my front bumper off as if tearing open a bag of potato chips. The damage to my car was $12,000, and it was nearly totaled. Even worse, the driver involved the police and attempted to sue me while claiming injuries, despite no evidence at the scene to support this. Thankfully, I had good insurance and they fought for me. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.